are you guys doing today? It's the True Game Nerd, and today we're going to take a look at something that I've reviewed a little while ago. This is ECW Hardcore Revolution for the Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1, and the Sega Dreamcast. Now, as you might recall from my last review, I made a lot of weird mistakes, and I'm doing this review mainly to correct those mistakes. In addition to those weird mistakes that I made, there were some aspects of the game where I might have been harsh, and a lack of research on my part may explain some of the harshness that I had for the last game. So if that makes any sense, we're going to go ahead and get the game started with the graphics. The graphics in ECW Hardcore Revolution are actually some of the nicest graphics that I've seen of that era. Now, that being said, with the character models and the faces looking slick, the menu looking slick, the arenas looking good, there are some problems, mainly in the fact that it's a different game's engine. So everything in this looks like an updated version of WWF Attitude. Now, what I think is there's a possibility that Paul Heyman needed to save money, and in order to save money, he paid Acclaim to use an engine that was already made. That way, you don't have to pay the programmers to create a whole new engine, because there are a lot of complications with that. And anyone who's done the research knows that Paul Heyman was working on a seriously low budget. So, unfortunately, the game had to suffer for that. But with the entrances looking as good as they do and the character models looking good, aside from a few size difference issues, it's solid. It's just a shame that it's another game's engine. So you come at it with somewhat of a negative perception solely based on that. The sound in ECW Hardcore Revolution has gotten a lot of mixed reactions from a lot of people, and let me explain why. So, again, Paul Heyman needed to save money. We already established that he used the WWF Attitude engine since the game was under the same developer. Now, there's some good and bad with this. The good? Well, the wrestlers all contributed by giving their own voice work to the game. So to those of us who don't like cartoony sounds in games or things of that nature, it's neat to hear Balls Mahoney and New Jack and Sabu and all those guys contribute in such a big way to the product of the game. Also, for those of us who are nostalgic, who don't necessarily want to buy the WWE Network to relive ECW, it's a way to relive it without all of the BS that would be WWE ECW years later, or having to just rely on the past. There are some things there that bother me. ECW was known for having licensed music, mainly to save money from hiring a composer, with the exceptions of guys like Sabu and Taz, who in some cases did have their own music, from what I recall. So the songs are largely just weird recreations of the licensed songs. But unless you were like me and you grew up watching the original ECW, in my day back in WGN, it's not that big of a deal, especially since all of the current WWE games get theme songs wrong all the time for license issues or whatever. Or in the case of ECW One Night Stand, changing music on the DVD. Come on, Vince, you got the money. So anyway, the sound's okay. The negative on the sound comes right down to the actual sound effects in the ring. The crowd sounds incredibly dated and strange. They yell random things. I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. The bone-cracking sounds sound really cheesy and arcade-ish, while the game itself is trying to be realistic. So it creates a bit of a problem, because it's basically WWF Attitude, which had come out a couple years prior. Or a year prior. My memory is a little faded on that. So that's what comes with the sound. I should mention that Joey Styles does the commentary, and that sounds great, especially for a guy by himself. And because it's just one commentator, there's more room for more sayings. So it sounds better than the commentary that they tried to do in SmackDown Here Comes the Pain, which is ironic considering the jump in the hardware. So there's good and bad with the sound. Now this is where a lot of us have an issue with the game, or a lot of the things that we have an issue with ECW Hardcore Revolution is the gameplay. And it didn't work in WWF Warzone, it did not work in WWF Attitude, and it certainly doesn't work now. Well, then, in 2000, whatever. So, everything is based on a command input, much like a fighting game. But the problem is, as a pro wrestling game, you need action to be moving at a very quick pace, especially an ECW game. Well, it's not the case. You'll be going back, forth, up, down, triangle, circle, B, A, whatever, desperately trying to get the moves out. Meanwhile, the enemy is pummeling you. Or you could just do what I do and press kick, 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 kick. They get dizzy, do a move, wrench, repeat. And that's the problem. So when you try to play the game on a harder difficulty, unless you can memorize the entire move list or be incredibly cheap like me, it just makes the game not fun. It makes all these various matches, hardcore matches, not fun. It kind of ruins the experience. And it's a shame because the game itself has an amazing creative character, far more advanced than the SmackDown games were, at least until SmackDown 3. It has an awesome create an arena. You can pick every detail when you create a character or an arena. The game itself has so many options. It even has a barbed wire match, which is something unique to the ECW game. Unfortunately, gameplay-wise, it doesn't do much aside from be really annoying when you Irish whip someone because they'll just fall down. A mistake I made, of course, prior is yes, you can leave the ring. Anyway, so the gameplay, it's just not what it should be. And finally, we talk about the design and the overall presentation. Again, there's a lot of good and bad here. With the graphics being pretty good for the time, Joey Styles' voice, gigantic arsenal of ECW wrestlers who, for the most part, you've never been able to play as in any other game, not counting Backyard Wrestling or Anarchy Rules anyway. You do get some positive things out of the overall presentation. Now, that being said, because Paul Heyman cut corners and used another game's engine, you are going to struggle with the feeling that you played this game before, and all of the same problems are still present. One of my biggest issues with the game is when you do the actual modes where you fight for a title. To save money, given the roster and everything, you fight some, I don't know how to describe, you fight wrestlers who don't exist half the time. And by the time you actually get to the championship and unlock people, some of the unlockables are just not worth the trouble. Whereas WWF Attitude, you could get Sable and Chyna, Jacqueline, you could get Shawn Michaels. In ECW, you can get Cyrus, a trainer, a weird nurse. It doesn't make me want to go back and play the game that much. So it's disappointing to me because there was some effort and some love that went to the game. But the gameplay itself is bad, and that's what ruins the experience. ECW is fast-paced, crazy, chaotic, and when you're trying to go left, right, up, down, A, it's impossible to have that kind of experience. So there's a lot of good and bad. For you ECW hardcore wrestling fans, it's nice to have because it takes you back to another time. For you gamers, you should probably pass on this one. So my original score that I gave it was a 6 out of 10, which to me is kind of like a D on a test. If you get a 6 out of 10, it's a D on a test. Well, my ratings haven't changed much since then. I'm actually going to give this a 7 out of 10. There's good in there. There's just a lot more bad. So On the positive side, good roster. Character voices are present. Create a Wrestler is good. Create an Arena is incredible. Overall presentation is very ECW. On the negative side, it's basically WWF Attitude. It feels like a mod for that reason. The gameplay itself is not good. And the unlockables leave a lot to be desired. So that's my re-review of ECW Hardcore Revolution. Again, I was a kid when I did that, so for any mistakes in the old review, I apologize. Next up, ECW Anarchy Rules. I'll be looking at some Twisted Metal games and a few others. Anything you guys request. Thank you for tuning in to True Game Nerd TV.